Hello and welcome to this tutorial on ArtRage 5. Alright, so this video aims to answer three questions. Question number one, what is ArtRage 5? Question number two, why should I use ArtRage 5? And question number three, how do I use ArtRage 5? Probably the most important of the three. First two I can answer almost immediately. ArtRage 5 is a digital painting program designed to simulate real-life painting techniques and brushes, as well as paint, that sort of thing. It's meant to simulate traditional media. There it is. So that's what ArtRage 5 is. Why should you use it? Well, a lot of that will come up in the how, but essentially it's usable with Photoshop as well as with other programs, and when you use it in conjunction with other programs, it becomes even more powerful than it already is in some regards. So let's get to it. Ignore that, that's just a random line for a test. Bloop, bloop, bloop. Okay. So this is ArtRage 5. This is what the interface looks like, unless you go up here to, I believe, View, and go to Interface mode and change it to Docking mode. In this way, you would put things off to the side, dock it. It will look very similar to, say, Photoshop. You could set it up however you wanted it in this regard. I prefer the classic mode, but that's just me. I'm also going to turn the lights out because I tend to prefer the dark themes. It's easier on the eyes. So, down at the bottom left, you'll immediately notice we have all these different weird little brushes and things. I say weird. They may look familiar if you're used to traditional media, which is good, because that's what this, you are the primary audience for this program. It's so realistic in some regards that it even will run out of paint with the normal acrylic brush. See, it runs out after a little while, unless you run back through it and you gain a little bit of it back. If you run through it a lot, and you can build it up. Every new stroke, though, will start over anew. Unlike Photoshop, you can just hit Control-Z and not Control-Alt-Z multiple times in order to undo. So there's a lot of hotkeys that I've found, but I'm going to, for the most part, stay away from them. Down here, you can use this to change the size of your brush. It ends at 100, but it can go all the way to a maximum of 500. 500 is the maximum for all the different brushes. If you hold, I believe you hold shift, yeah, if you hold shift and drag left and right, you can bring it up and down. Like I said, for the most part, but if any come to mind as I'm working, I will point them out here. So you have your color picker down here. You can obviously choose your different colors, any color you want in the rainbow. Sorry, I don't know about any other colors, but you can also save colors. So if you come up with some brand new color and you think, wow, I love this green, it's perfect, you can add it as a sample, and there it is, right in your swatch. Well, swatches, Illustrator coming through. Your samples. Another thing, if you click this button, you get a lot of other options. It's just something to note that in any of these menus, you'll see this little folder button. It's pretty much the same thing as right-clicking. If I just, well, I say it's the same. In most cases, it's the same as right-clicking. Here, you have to click on it, and then you get a bunch of different examples. Saving, creating different collections, loading in different collections, that sort of thing. So that's the samples page. A nice thing about this color picker is it has something different from a lot of other color pickers. It has this metallic percentage. If I pull it up, this was the last green that I did, but now my green has a bunch of depth and texture. It's almost like adding a bump map to it if you're a modeler. Next up, we have tracing. This feature is really cool. If you click this button, it'll take you to an opening window, and you can choose an item, an image, and make it a reference point in the background. Not only is this useful for just trying to work off of something else, but the tracing function actually alters the way your brushes work. If you look down here, using trace color, click for normal color. The color picker has changed, and that's because it's going to choose colors based off of where it is that I'm clicking on. So right here I'm getting skin color, I'm getting hair color, color of the loot in the background, the cloth, the belt, along with the green that's already here, more green, the brown of the fur. You get the idea. And you can create some pretty abstract stuff with this. If you click on the box again, you can change the opacity of the background image, as well as some other options. But if you look here, it's not actually making like an exact replica of what's in the background. It's just a reference point to pull colors and general shapes. You could turn an image into a very abstract piece of art if you wanted to in this way, for example, which is fun, but I think it would become most useful in adding some extra texture or paint colors, strokes, that sort of thing to your already created digital painting, and then to re-implement it into Photoshop. I'll get to that in a little bit. And again, over here, if you click on this option, it's going to bring down a bunch of options for you based on the window you're in. So I can choose to completely clear the tracing image, and so then it gives me a color picker back. I could have clicked it, but that's okay. This, by the way, is just a visibility button. Haven't figured out what this is yet. Alright, so next up I'm going to show you references. This is probably one of my favorite features of ArtRage 5. If you click on an image that you have, I'm going to use the same one, then you'll get this little pinned object that you can actually, if I remember correctly, there's a way to rotate. Yeah, here we go. Check it out. Hold on. I can rotate the image, and then there it is. I can just leave it pinned at that odd angle. I just kind of like it. It's a nice little aesthetic feature that's just for fun, but still gets the point across. If you can hit this button, come on. Oh, okay, sorry. If you hold down on the button and drag, then you can zoom in on the image, and then use this one to pan around the image after it's zoomed in. It's useful if you want to get in close, but you don't want to take up any extra space than the reference image is already implementing. You can add multiple if you wanted to, as well as these two options. This option creates a piece of scrap. It's just for writing notes. So I'm going to bring this way down. There you go. And in the same way, you can zoom in, pan around, and rotate with the pen. There it is. This will give you some options. You can undo, you can create an entire new thing, you can reset it, or remove it. And those little arrows were just undo and redos. Last option is this one, new view. Well, this one's odd. It looks exactly like my canvas. I wonder what happens if I... What? I can draw on this at the same time? What about over here? Will it update? It updates in the thumbnail. Okay. So if you're wondering why I think this is so important, it's because I do a lot of thumbnailing when I'm making designs and sketches. Thumbnails are very important in production and speed of creating designs. It's so you don't get lost in the details first. You want to come up with the best designs first and then get into the details, all the pretty little tiny bits that go into making the design what it is. So this is very useful, so I can just kind of get a basic silhouette of something that I want, right? And then I can, you know, look how it actually looks on in full resolution as well. So there you go. That's what that image is. Okay, running out of time here with screencast-o-matic. So that's also a good thing. Make sure I keep it tight, keep it slow. I mean fast. Remove all references. Alright. So that I've shown you tracing, I've shown you references, and I've shown you layers. Alright. If your image opens like this, if your software opens like this, over here is where you're going to find layers in classic mode. Layers work very similar to Photoshop. You can have blend modes and all sorts of things, but it's much more simplistic in the approach visually. It's very intuitive, actually, once you start to understand some basic principles that the software sets up. These little folders give you added options. There's recurring iconography that you can find throughout all the different tabs and pop-up windows. And it's pretty intuitive. It's nice. So I can add a bunch of new layers. I can create a group. What I cannot do is create a clipping mask like in Photoshop. And there is a point of contention there. That is one downside I will state here. If you take a Photoshop file and load it in this, and yes, this can read Photoshop files, it'll maintain all of its layers. Well, almost. That's the point of contention. If you load in a Photoshop file into ArtRage 5, what happens is if you have any layers that are clip masked to another layer, so you alt-click between the two layers to make one layer specifically become masked by the layer it's clipped to, then that clipped layer, the one that gets shifted over, that one won't function. It'll just make it its own separate layer, and so if you have a bunch of scribbles that are outside of that clipping area, the clipping area of the layer underneath, it's just going to look like a giant splotching blob, and we don't want that. That's not useful. So there it is. So whenever you bring in Photoshop files, be sure to clean them up first. Compress some things that you know for certain that are okay to compress. And honestly, just save 2 different versions if you're going to bring a Photoshop file into ArtRage 5. So there it is. That is ArtRage 5's layer system. Over here we have brush settings. You can go into a lot of different things here. These are I'm going to call them the temporary settings, because if you go up here to Tools and go to Brush Designer, you can create your own entire brush. You can do this in Photoshop as well, but I just find it pretty useful that this program has a Brush Designer function already within the program. So this is an old brush that I actually was working on in a previous, I guess, recording of this tutorial. So you can see how it kind of works. It was more just a texture brush. I was messing with a bunch of different settings and things. You can change like how close every single dab is. If you make the dab have no spacing, then it's going to be more like a normal brush, which this is actually pretty interesting with this brush. I kind of like it. Anyways, it's more of a texture brush, so I will leave it alone. Next up, we have blend modes. You can turn the brush strokes into actual blend modes. This one has a vivid light blend, so that's why you still see everything underneath. Speaking of blend modes, earlier I mentioned in the Layers tab that you can use blend modes, but I didn't show you how. If you click on this little icon here, like with many other tabs, it gives you a bunch of options. But in the Layers tab, you have several options. You can create layer groups, add layers, duplicate layers, clear layers, delete them, merge, a bunch of things that you might expect. However, you also have blend modes, which in ArtRage 5 you have 4 unique blend modes that don't exist in Photoshop, at least not without plugins that I know of. In any event, here is your blend modes. You got all your basic ones as well as the 4 ArtRage specific ones. Okay, so next up, let's talk about this little thing over here. This essentially is just allowing you to rotate your canvas, and then you can move it around by clicking this. If you click up here, you can input your own specific rotation amount. I'm going to reset it to 0. Zoom in and out in intervals, or pan around. It's a pretty simple little gizmo, but it's useful all the same. So if you go to view, there's a couple more things that I want to talk to you about. Specifically down here at the bottom. We have grids, so you can show a grid. It gives you that option. You also can add guides. More specifically, these rulers here. That's what these little icons right here, these tiny little icons are. If you click and drag outwards, you'll bring out specific rulers that you can then snap to and paint along. The last one that you can use is this little cross grid, which creates both points at the same time, but if you want to get a specific targeted point, target acquired, let it go. There it is. Doesn't work unless you make the sound effect. Just saying. If you want to get rid of the guides, though, you can go down to guides and you can just hide them. Or say you still want to see the guides. Oops. Whoa. I didn't want to turn on grid. All right. Say you still want to see the guides. You just want to get rid of the guides that are currently available. You can clear guides and then start again. Unfortunately, I don't know exactly how to delete one at a time, but that is how you delete all of them all at once. All or nothing. So there are 2 more functions to this program that I want to show you. If we go back to view, there was one other option down in this useful little section called perspective. I'm going to click show perspective. Ooh. Now I have this nice box in the background, and just for the sake of making this easier to read for now, go ahead and delete everything that was there. It looks like the scene out of Star Wars: New Hope whenever they're blowing up the Death Star. And that's going to be the default perspective view, but if you go to perspective, you can actually edit it. And then it takes you into this mode for editing perspective. 2 things immediately of note. Up here, you can change it from 1-point perspective to 2-point perspective. Doing so, going from one to the other will delete your current setup. So if you have a perspective created and grids created that you want to save, be sure to save it before moving on, which you can do so by clicking here and save perspective. There's also default versions of both perspectives here. So for this next bit, I'm going to stay in 2-point perspective just to show the control you have here. Alright, right off the bat, you have these different tools here. With the move tool, you can just select things, move them around, ta-da. Whenever you have a plane selected and you're choosing to move it around, it's going to move it around based on the point that it is directed to. So it'll always maintain that perspective. Unfortunately, there is not necessarily a multiple horizon line function, so you would just have to move the horizon line yourself and maybe draw it out yourself. But this can at least get you started, or for simple perspective, or could be used for simple perspective. Alright, so next up, delete. Let's go ahead and just get rid of both of these. Want to make my own perspective. If we go to the next one over, we can add a wall. If you see, this one is the one that's blinking, and now this one is the one that's blinking. Based off of the one that's blinking, every time I click, I'm going to create a perspective wall from that specific point. Do it from over here. Ta-da, it's so beautiful. Same with the add floor. I mean, it could also just as easily be a ceiling. Click this one. There, we got a ceiling. Maybe it's a floor to someone. And now this feels like a floor, but maybe it's a ceiling to someone else. And you get the idea. And you can do it over here too. Pretty cool. I really like it, at least. I'm going to go ahead and clear all, just so I can show this next bit in greater detail. So I have this plane created, and it'll base each plane that you create off of planes that already exist. So you see this one is pretty much the same one, but it started it above it. What if or it feels like it's above it. What if I want it to be below it? It's kind of hard to get that feeling. And you see, it kind of arbitrarily, well, seemingly arbitrarily, will decide the size of the plane itself. So if you want to control that, if you go to your move tool, you can change these little points, which obviously in 2-point perspective only goes to, oh, I didn't know it did that. Anyways, only goes to the selected, the 2 points. And of course you can move your 2 points in different directions and ways. So if you wanted to have an extremely forced perspective, there it is. You have control over that. Whee! If you've noticed any of the planes that I've been putting down or have selected, there's this little triangle icon, usually on the far edge of it. If you drag this along, you can decide exactly where the plane begins and ends, which can be pretty useful. You can always go back in and adjust them. All right, come up. There we go. I want to make this more like so, just for the sake of showing it. Oh. You can only move planes by the outer edge. I just discovered that right now. I thought I could just click and drag, but you have to use the outermost edge from the point that is being used. Alright. So if you go to here, you can add major lines into your perspective. So if you have specific points that you want to grid out and map out for whatever reason, you can do so. It's pretty useful. One that is for horizontal, another that is for vertical, if you will. If you hit snap to perspective, this is how you can start getting things to fit to each other. As you can see, it'll snap. Snap, snap. It comes more in handy. I'm going to clear just for the sake of simplicity's sake here. It's more for the sake of combining 2 different planes together. Once you have 2 planes like this, like so, you can then move them and make them snap to each other. Make the points snap to each other. So you have a perfect box. It's pretty useful. You can change the number of lines that go along each grid, as well as the projection distance. So I add the word distance just because if you see and I start taking away the percentage of projection, this is how far out it's going to project your grid. Which in some cases, maybe you do want it to be highly condensed, but I think in most cases you're probably going to want it to be pretty minimalistic so you can see better. Once you're done though, you can hit this little check mark, and boom, you're ready to go. And then I can start drawing, and as you see, it defaults to trying to paint along lines. I'm just using the mouse right now. I'm not even using any sort of tablet or anything. But see, even as I move along, it naturally wants to snap to these by default. If you wish to turn that off, if you go down to perspective, you can turn snap to perspective off. So that way you can freely move about of your own free will, not being constrained to the grid. But perhaps you want that, so there it is. The very last thing that I want to talk to you about, it's not something that I can actually show you, because I have a demo version, unfortunately. But I read up on it, and it has this very unique feature called record script. Why is this important, and what does it do? Well, let's just say, for the sake of example, that I was painting an image on a canvas size of 100 pixels by 100 pixels. So I have my beautiful little smiley face, and it was just so detailed. I wanted to preserve all of the little things, the nooks and crannies that are in this 100 by 100 pixel image. It looks kind of crappy maybe in the 100 by 100 image, but I can infinitely scale it up thanks to, well, to a certain, I say infinitely, up to the point that the percentage of a brush will maximize to. There's a face for you. So why is this important? Essentially, what you have the power to do is record a painting, record the stroke, record the weight of it, if I'm being very light or very pressed in, and then play it back at a different canvas size. This will repaint the entire canvas at the new canvas size and preserve the stroke and shape perfectly. And that about covers everything that I've learned about the program so far. I would say it was a decent introduction to ArtRage 5. If you want to give it a shot, the program has a demo version, it's the same version that I'm using, where it gives you the entire software for free, the one stipulation being that you're not able to save anything. You just can't save any of the work that you're doing. So unless you want the high quality version of the image, the only way you're going to be able to get the image that is on your screen is by taking a screen capture. So that's about it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.